Greetings! I am excited to talk about knives. I still feel very strongly that the most valuable tool is still a good knife, and especially if you're talking about real survival scenarios, wilderness survival, bushcraft, things of this nature. Again, there's all sorts of debate about what's most important, what's most useful in a survival situation. And I'm not here to trump anybody's opinion, just here to give my opinion. My opinion is that in even a wilderness or a survival situation, generally speaking, a knife is what I would want, is what I would choose. And in everyday, practical, day-to-day life, a knife is still one of the most valuable things. It's actually still something that people do use on a semi-regular basis, but normally they've just got like a little razor blade or X-Acto knife that they use at their work, or they've got kitchen knives that they use in their kitchen. But most people don't really carry knives anymore. And I have experienced myself that from simply carrying knives on an everyday basis, that they become really useful. If you don't have it, you can't use it. So with all wilderness survival, bushcrafting, or survival scenarios set aside, a knife is still extremely useful, and having a good knife, at least one really good knife, is invaluable and quite potentially one of the most valuable things you could ever have. Definitely one of the most valuable things worth investing in. So, there is a lot to discuss about knives when you get into it, especially when you start talking about all the different metals and alloys and all the different procedures and, alchemies of creating these knives and blades. And so, obviously, I can't go into everything. I can't even begin to go into everything in an hour-long presentation such as this. So what I'm going to really try to focus on is practicality, more of an overview, and also something that's interesting and fun and valuable to more people than more of just like a sort of specific, you don't have to be a super knowledgeable knife enthusiast to really enjoy this presentation. So, again, knives. There is a huge range of knives. I've got some small knives. I've got some big knives. Right now, I'm wearing right now, this is just a very practical knife. It's a good size, right? You can do a lot of things, most things with this. It's not too big to where it's bulky, something like this is big. This is really actually more of a show knife. It's really beautiful. It matches my outfit, which I really appreciate. This is much more of a practical knife. This is much more of a big, like, specialty use knife. Potentially not even considered a knife, more technically a kukri. But the small sort of practical knives is really where it's really at, and this is something that you kind of really have to have. Something like this isn't something you have to have. This is something that you have if you really love knives. This is something that you basically have to have. It's a good size. You can use it for all sorts of things, but it's not too big. Also, another thing you have to consider for an actual knife that you're carrying and wearing, especially if you live in a city or out in civilization, is that a lot of states, a lot of countries have all sorts of regulations on knives. It's really ridiculous. Obviously, we don't live in a free country, but you are potentially at risk of being arrested and put in a prison, a jail, having men with guns come after you by having knives over certain sizes. So this is a nice small knife, but as far as what makes it good, besides its size and practicality, because again, there's a lot of things that go into a knife. One is the steel. What is it made of? There are all sorts of steels that are superior to other steels for various purposes. There really is no such thing as the best steel, right? There isn't one type of steel that's the best for all knives or all blades. Really what it's about is using the proper steel for the proper application. What is the knife being used for? What is the purpose of the knife? And that's really what's going to dictate what is the best steel to use. The next thing is how is the steel tempered? How is it forged? How is it crafted? And honestly, that in a way has more to do with a good blade than the steel itself does. You could have a really expensive and high quality steel, but with improper tempering or improper forging, the knife would still be weak. It would still be a lame, cheap, not a good knife, right? So the tempering is really important. The crafting and the forging is also really, really important. This is a really high quality knife. It's made by a very competent craftsman. It's handmade. It's a full tang. Full tang is one of the most critical aspects of a really high quality good knife. The reason why is because you get the full thickness of the blade this way, and you get the full thickness of the blade this way, which means there's no weak points, right? If you have a knife like this, which is really beautiful, and it's actually made of some really nice stainless steel, but it doesn't have a full tang, it's got what's called a rat tang. And so the tang does come all the way out the bottom, which is good. I would never get a knife that had less than at least a rat tang. But what happens is it gets thin, it gets skinny, it gets into like a little rat tail. It does go all the way to the end. I don't even have any knives, but there's a lot of knives that are made where the tang just goes to right here. And so what happens is you've got all this handle portion of the blade, which doesn't actually have any of the forged tempered steel in it. So the handle is super weak. The handle's going to break. You can't really ever rely on or count on the knife, and therefore it would never be a knife that you would want to be relying upon for especially a survival situation. So again, this is more of like a show knife. It's beautiful, it's fun, it's still sharp, it's still usable, it's still a relatively good knife, but it's not a warrior blade, it's not a survival blade. All right, something like this is actually a lot bigger, and this would meet the criteria. This is a Bowie knife. This wouldn't be my #1 choice necessarily, but it is actually a pretty solid all-around choice for a survival blade. Again, it's too big. You couldn't really go walking around carrying this in the city, otherwise you're going to have men with guns coming after you, have people freaking out. But it is a really high-quality blade. It's got a full tang both ways, all the way down. Right, so it's going to be strong. It doesn't have any weak points. It's not going to break. A really nice thing about having a big blade like this is that you can use it for more of sort of chopping. You can use it more like an axe or a machete or some sort of a kukri. Right? The potential downside is that it's huge, and that's why I like to carry a knife like this, generally speaking, over a knife like this. You know, having both of them is worth having for sure. But if I was just going to be carrying one every day, this would be the type of knife that I'd be carrying every day. Again, it's small enough to not, draw danger by the mafia. It's practical and small enough to be able to use easily, to put in, out.